There we go. Okay. So welcome everyone to the September meeting of our Scrutiny board. Before we start the formal agenda, I'd like to go through the board membership and ask you all to introduce yourselves for any members of the public who are watching. So we'll start with Neil Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil Buckley, All Woodley Ward.
Thank you, Neil. And Lou.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Neil Dawson.
Good morning, everybody on the board and any other visitors. Councillor Neil Dawson, Morley South Ward.
And Katie Dye.
Morning, everyone. I'm Katie Dye. I'm councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft.
Thank you. We've had apologies from Councillor Jacob Goddard, but I'm delighted to welcome Councillor Karen Renshaw, who is substituting. Karen, if you could just introduce yourself.
Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Asden Robin Hood Ward and substituting for Councillor Goddard.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Councillor Graham here from Bermondsey and Richmond Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Maxood.
Good morning, Councillor Camilla Maxood, representing the Gipton and Hare Hills Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Shazad. Councillor Shazad. Are you back with us? Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Taylor.
Good morning, Councillor Jonathan Taylor, Horsworth Ward.
Councillor Wadsworth.
Good morning, Councillor Paul Wadsworth, representing Guiseley Road and Ward.
And I'm Councillor Paul Truswell. I represent Middleton and Belle Isle and I chair the Scrutiny board. So just going through, Councillor Shazad, are you back with us yet? No, okay, I'll continue. So first 5 items. Appeals, there are none. Exclusion of public, there are no items for which this is applicable. Late items, there were none. Declarations of interest, I'm not aware of any, but please shout up at the appropriate time if you've got any. Apologies, we've already had Councillor Goddard's apologies and the introduction of Councillor Renshaw as his substitute. That takes us on to the item 6, the minutes of the last meeting. And in my time-honoured fashion, I'll go through them page by page. So please shout out if there are any corrections that you wish to make or any matters arising. And I know that Councillor Graham has got a couple of matters arising. So page 5. Page 6.
Matters arising, Chair. On page 6.
Yeah, fire away, Ron.
On page 6, top of page 6, when you come down to the bullet points, it says the following has been highlighted. It's the 6th bullet point down where the discretionary grants is gone. It's the 2nd bullet point down from the top where the discretionary grant scheme has been operated, and there's still time to put in for the finance that's available. I'm putting forward to Shazad that he would consider putting in for discretionary grants for the taxi drivers to apply for masks for the visitors to the taxis. So any person using the taxi would have an opportunity to put a mask on. That's one. The second point is where we come down the bullet points on page 6 and 7, 6 rather, right, where it says flood alleviation scheme. It's come to my attention now that where flooding is concerned, the fire service, West Yorkshire Fire Service, and all the 43 other services have no legal responsibility for dealing with flooding. We as a council need to look at that to see if we are owed any money at all from DEFRA as regarding where flooding is concerned, looking after West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire and the recent flooding episodes that's occurred. Okay, Chair.
Okay, would any of the officers in attendance like to introduce themselves and respond to Councillor Graham's points, please? Don't all shout at once.
Yeah, perhaps if I respond, Councillor Truswell. In terms of the discretionary grant point.
If you could just introduce yourself, Martin, please.
Yeah, I'm the Director of City Development at the Council. In terms of the discretionary grant fund, what's recorded in the minutes is the position at that point in time. The scheme actually closed a new application at the end of August, and payments have to go out by the end of September. So there isn't at this current moment in time the flexibility to accept new applications because of that closure deadline. In terms of the flood scheme, we are in regular dialogue with the Environment Agency on the delivery of flood measures across the council through our flood risk management team and the projects that we're delivering. So in terms of those finance opportunities for funding schemes, we are very much alive to those, Chair, and that includes the recent money that we got from government to help fund the flood alleviation scheme 2 that was announced a few weeks ago.
Could I come back there, Martin, while you're on? Where the flood defence scheme is, I've no problem with that. It's the legal responsibility where the West Yorkshire Fire Service is concerned. We need to get that in the articles of governance, are you with me, right? Both in West Yorkshire and the Leeds City Council as regarding the legal aspects as regarding dealing with floods. Are you with me? That's what I'm bothered about, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Graham. That's helpful clarification. So perhaps if it helps, Chair, if I ask our flood risk manager to do a note on the balance of those responsibilities between ourselves, the Environment Agency, and then any responsibilities that we feel that in the context of what Councillor Graham says, the Fire Authority does have, and then that note can be made available to members if that assists.
Thank you, mine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. And just to remind board members that we do actually have an item at the November meeting on flood risk management where we can also revisit this if you wish. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Dye and then Councillor Shazad.
Hi, yes, mine's on the same page and it's the 4th bullet point down, and it reports about restarting bus provision post lockdown, and saying that bus provision will increase, capacity has been increased to 50%. I just wondered if we have any updates on that. I know we're in a very fluid situation, but I've been contacted by several people who've had issues from young people going into town to attend colleges now that the colleges are back, and buses sailing past them full and students being late to college. And when I've inquired about it, it's been because the buses have been full and they can't get on them. So I just wondered if there's any update on that.
Okay, is that something that Gary could perhaps comment on?
Yes, Chair, I can comment on that.
If you could just introduce yourself and then respond.
Yeah, Gary Bartlett, Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation. So we had an update from First, in particular at the Silver Infrastructure Group on Monday, and they're reporting that patronage levels are about 55% of last year's volumes, under 19s at 70% of last year's volumes, and their mileage is at 99% of pre-COVID levels, except for Temple Green Park and Ride services, because that remains the regional testing facility. So we're not opening that one just yet. The issue is, as the councillors outlined, is that capacity on these buses is at 50% because of social distancing issues. So that there will be occasions when some buses will be regarded as full. So it's about planning journeys ahead and being patient, unfortunately, at this time. But both the bus operators and train operators are reporting that they are trying to get as close to full timetable as possible, but it's the impact of social distancing that's causing the issues, and will continue to do so, I'm afraid.
Okay, you okay with that, Katie?
Well, yeah, can I just ask, is there a possibility of any more buses being put on at peak times? Because it just seems such a shame when students are back in school, goodness knows how long they're going to be back in school, and whilst they're there, they're struggling to get to their colleges.
Yes.
Yeah, I will certainly. I know that there's lots of contingency plans, and certainly the return to school was very effective in terms of, as it was reported to me anyway, in terms of all the contingency plans and the preparations that took place by WICA, the Combined Authority, and the bus operators. and any issues that did arise were resolved by moving buses around within 24 hours. So there's been quite a significant preparations for that, but I can certainly report back into the combined authority these concerns. They're doing what they can with the fleet available, but obviously it's a finite fleet, and drivers are obviously finite as well at the present time and will be affected by COVID issues as well. But I'm more than happy to report that to the combined authority chair and flag it up, because they have regular meetings obviously with the bus operators.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
Thank
You
you.
okay with that,
Yeah, thank you.
Katie? Okay. Councillor Shazad.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. Sorry, I missed my introduction. It's Councillor Mami Shazad from the Moortown ward. What it is, the point that is made by Councillor Graham is a very good point. It's something that I've been going on about from the beginning, and I know discretionary grants will not be available because they're classified as not as a business, as self-employed, but I see them as a business, and I know they're shut now. But a lot of the councils have actually worked with the NHS England and with the government, especially with the new rules coming in, PPE equipment. I could understand the drivers would be able to go out and probably get their own now, because obviously if they want to work, they've got no other choice. But as a driver, you've got issues. You will be the main transport provider, because the buses, as mentioned by the officer, are not running at full capacity, and not many people are wanting to use buses with the number of people on there. The drivers are suffering, and they will get customers who will try and come into the car and say, we haven't got any masks. So if you can work with NHS England or the government and provide some sort of, whether it's those surgical masks or some sort of masks that the drivers can actually hand out, there doesn't have to be a lot. Maybe if they could all get about 10 masks each, so those customers that do come to them and don't have the masks, it would be really great to offer them that ability to be able to give that customer the mask so they can actually earn a living. Whereas especially with the new lockdown rules, everything finishing at 10 o'clock and not getting another chance of probably another self-employed grant, I think the taxi drivers are going to be hit really hard. And as a council, we have over 6,000 registered with Leeds City Council as drivers for Leeds City Council. So we need to see if we can do something for them. And if the officers could look into that, it would be really appreciated.
Thank you, Mo. Gary, can you pick that up?
I can certainly talk to our licensing colleagues on that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands on this page. So moving on to page 7, I don't know if there are any points in there. Could I just raise one issue? The first bullet point, the final sentence, says that members would receive ward level information in terms of payouts of discretionary grants. I'm not aware that that's happened yet. Is that still the intention? Is that still possible?
We won't be able to, sorry, I should introduce myself, Chair.
Yes, please.
Eve Roothouse, Chief Officer for Economic Development. We will publish all the information at ward level, but we're only going to be in a position to do that once we've got past the deadline of the 30th of September, because I'm sure members appreciate that our primary focus is on appraising grants and getting that money out the door before the deadline. But we do commit fully to making sure that the information is available later in the autumn once we've processed.
Okay, thank you for that confirmation, Eve. So if there's nothing else on page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, and page 11. So can I take it that board members are happy for me to sign these as a correct record when I'm physically able to put pen to paper? Any dissent? No. Okay. So moving on to agenda item 7, the COVID-19 update, which I assume is going to be kicked off by Martin. But before we do that, obviously Martin and Eve have already introduced themselves. We do have Councillor Mulheron with us. So Lisa, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lisa Mulheron, Ashley Robin Hood, and Exec Member for Climate Change, Transport and Sustainable Development.
And Sue Wynne, please.
Good morning, Chair. Sue Wynne, Chief Officer, Employment and Skills.
Hi, Sue. Welcome. Okay, Martin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, there's a report in the pack that members have got. Perhaps as an introduction, if I just go through some of the headlines across the service areas, and there are a number of chief officers and heads of service available on this meeting that will be able to provide responses to any detailed questions. In terms of the first area, looks at asset management, in terms of our property portfolio within the council. One of the key areas in the report highlights the survey of staff working at home that's been undertaken. There's more than 8,000 staff currently working at home. The outcome of that survey being that 52% would like to work from home most or all of the time. 80% indicated a desire to continue to work from home more than half a week. And importantly, 12% were unhappy with the current position of working from home. But taking the outcome of that survey as a whole and looking at the implications across our property portfolio, particularly our offices, it does lead the need for the council to look at options for rationalising our property portfolio and our estate, and the position of us bringing forward reports through executive board on that, one of which will go to executive board tomorrow to outline those principles, and then any detailed rationalisation would follow through further reports. In terms of economic development, the report highlights that during the period between April and June, there was a shrinking of 24% of the economy. It is the case that during July and August, we saw signs of recovery, footfall, currently at about 67.5% of normal levels. So a meaningful improvement of where it was during lockdown, but considerably down still on the normal position. And it'll be important to see how that trend continues in light of the most recent announcements yesterday. In terms of general activity as well, looking at traffic flows as a proxy, they tend to average still at about 15% down, with rail 70% lower than it was pre-lockdown in March. There's in the paper, it outlines our approach to recovery in terms of the framework, and three core elements of: one, responding where required to support business and the economy; reset and renew in terms of the direction of projects and partnerships; and then thirdly, building resilience. And this is really about maintaining our long-term view on our core strategic aims, including inclusive economic growth, climate emergency, and health and well-being. We pick up on the administration of grants. We've administered the business support grants, and as of the 11th of September, paid out £153,460,000 through the Small Business Grants Fund and the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Grants Fund. And then we also pick up on the position on the Discretionary Grants Fund, where, as of this morning, we've currently paid out in excess of £5.8 million to more than 600 businesses, and we continue to apply resources to ensure that we can pay out as many grants as possible before the end of September deadline that has been set. In terms of employment and skills, we cover the universal credit claimants, and that in July that had risen to 67,174. That's a 90% increase in claimant numbers, both in and out of work prior to lockdown. The Employment and Skills Service continues to support companies that are going through redundancy processes and reducing staff numbers. The service supported 1,382 people into work from April to July this year. On highways and transportation, some of the headlines are that measures on social distancing have been introduced on the highways infrastructure. We have an approach and a policy of plan, monitor and manage in terms of how effective they are. That has led to changes on 3 sites, including Wetherby being withdrawn because of the impacts it had and concerns raised by ward members. And we have the support for schools through the School Streets initiative with 6 trials introduced. Active travel measures have also been brought forward that included additional segregation on the cycle lane on the A65 Kirkstall Road, with further trial measures proposed on the A660. In terms of the Emergency Active Travel Fund, Leeds has received an allocation of £710,000 of monies plus £20,000 of revenue from the combined authority as part of the first phase of works. DfT have outlined a 12-week delivery time frame for those works to be completed, and the report outlines proposals under tranche 1 and tranche 2 in the tables attached to the report. The report that you've got in front of you also picks on the position generally in terms of the city centre and the market. Kirkgate Market has remained operational throughout the pandemic. Discounts are in place for tenants at a minimum of 25%, and hardship is also being considered on a case-by-case basis where tenants require assistance greater than that discount. Footfall during January to July in the market is 40% down from the previous year. It has shown signs of recovery during July and August, but how it recovers moving forward in light of yesterday's announcements will be something that we will monitor closely. And then in para 3.6.6 of the report, there are measures outlined in relation to the city centre of the works that we've undertaken to try and help promote the city centre economy and the retail economy to recover. And then finally in the report, there's a section on planning which outlines how the service has remained operational throughout this period. So I mean, that's a headline overview, Councillor Trustwell, but happy for us to receive any questions from members on the detail of the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I've got Neil and then Jonathan. Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I have to say, it's the most depressing situation that, in my view, that we could possibly think of, really. But I have 2 questions about what Martin has just said. He mentioned the survey of staff, which is very interesting, and there are a whole number of strands involved here, because more senior, more well-paid people in organisations, in big organisations, who tend to have bigger houses in nice places, tend to want to work from home, and the reverse applies, of course, the further you get away from that. But the point I wanted to make here was that it seems pretty obvious that whenever all this ends, we are going to end up with a lot of people working from home who weren't previously. And what strikes me is that we've a classic example in the Conservative office. There's a researcher who has worked for us now, and he seems a lovely lad. He's been with us, what, a year, 9 months, 10 months, no idea. Nobody's ever met him. And I said to him the other week, it's just so unfair. And my question on this is, how on earth do new entrants into employment, how on earth are they nurtured along? And how do they get to know how to progress and how to develop and how to absorb other ideas? So that's my first question. And secondly, on the same overall area, shrinking of the estate. If we are turning a negative into a positive, it would be very interesting to have some dates on when proposals actually come to the council about which places are going to be got rid of and sold. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the survey of the staff, and Councillor Buckley raises an important point in terms of staff development, well-being, people getting the social interaction in the office. And certainly in terms of the work we've done, it is quite clear that working from home works for certain tasks, report writing, clearing emails, etc. But there is that whole social interaction, being creative, you know, that agile working that you miss. And the answer to Councillor Buckley's question is about maintaining that balance. I think it certainly is the case across a whole range of areas, and this is just one, that what the impact of the pandemic has done has quickened the pace of a number of areas that were evident in any event, where we have gradually increased working from home in the council over the past few years. But as a consequence of the pandemic, it's become a necessity on a very significant scale. And there is a learning curve that we're rapidly going on in terms of how we respond to that. And I agree with Councillor Buckley that the level of home working post the pandemic is going to increase. But it is important that we pick up on those aspects that Councillor Buckley said in terms of how people interact, spend some time in the office, get that training and development. And we're working very closely with colleagues in our HR department in the council on those measures to make sure that that framework is put in place. And I'll ask perhaps Angela Barnacle to touch on that further in a moment. But before I do, in terms of the second question that you raised, Councillor Buckley, we have a report going to Executive Board tomorrow. In terms of shrinking the estate, one of the proposals that we're saying is to bring properties forward through auction for disposal. And that's simply a measure of gaining certainty on the disposal within a time frame, particularly at a time of economic uncertainty, where auction is a more deliverable method for properties of a certain size. If they get beyond a certain size and value, then auction isn't necessarily the best route. But for the smaller properties, it is. There's an auction in October that we'll be using. We're also looking at auctions in December and February. So we will bring forward the appropriate reports through Executive Board to help facilitate us bringing anything forward that we plan to in December and February, with the appropriate ward member consultation that will go alongside that. So I don't know if Angela wants to make any further comment on the staff development question that Councillor Buckley raised.
Angela, before you do, could you just introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, I'm Angela Barnacle. I'm the Chief Officer for Asset Management and Regeneration. Thank you, Martin. Just to touch on Councillor Buckley's comment about onboarding our new colleagues and particularly cohorts of our workforce who have struggled at home. We also found that actually the people who struggle the most were probably our younger cohort, who obviously work was a huge part of their social environment, and also are perhaps in housing where they're either shared and don't have that safe space to be able to work in a confidential or a quiet way, or actually are on the first rung of the housing ladder and do not have that ability to have that separation of space within their home. So we quickly made space available within our COVID secure estate to make sure those people who needed to be in a safe environment had the access to do that. So at the minute, we have 1,000 desks available throughout our portfolio for people who want to come back in, and we are nowhere near that capacity. In light of the guidance that's coming out and the restrictions that were announced yesterday, we're just reviewing about what that means within our estate. But our estate is COVID secure, and where people need a safe environment for wellbeing or productivity reasons, we will certainly be working really hard to make sure that that is available. And as Martin said, we're working extremely closely with our facilities management colleagues and also our human resources colleagues about making sure that when we are taking on new people, that they are feeling embedded into into the team as soon as possible. And I certainly know that members or colleagues on this call have had new recruits, and they have done a various amounts of things to make sure that people felt welcomed into the organisation and actually had some contact and got to know their networks. Is there anything else you'd like me to add in terms of that response?
Neil, do you want to come back?
No, I just make a brief comment. I thank both officers, actually, very helpful. But just a brief comment, really, that users obviously like the council of large commercial properties, or small commercial properties for that matter, in the city centres, leaving the city centre, retailers fleeing city centres. It's a pretty depressing prospect, isn't it?
Okay, thanks for that. I've got Jonathan Taylor, Neil Dawson, who waved a physical human hand rather than an icon at me, and then Councillor Cunningham and Councillor Wadsworth. So, Jonathan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 5 questions across the report. Am I okay to deliver all 5 now, or would you prefer in sort of separate parts?
Go on. They're all intelligent, highly paid officers. They should be able to absorb those.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. 3.3.5 discretionary grant funding. I didn't get an opportunity to speak on the white paper that Councillor Matthew Robinson put forward last time. I just missed out. I kind of feel that 3 months and 1,000 applicants should have been enough to get this money out of the door. After we raised it at the scrutiny board over the last 2 scrutiny meetings we've had, were any representations made to government about giving grants to businesses such as what Councillor Shazad mentioned earlier on, who may have not received any support, or maybe received other support and therefore didn't qualify, and that was a question I've asked previously. 3.5.7, I think colleagues on this board have said that the school street scheme has been welcomed by staff and parents where it has been implemented, but all schools don't qualify. So are there longer term plans to engage with schools about how potentially the highway could be altered to accommodate a safer walk to and from school? Third question is 3.5.11. What has been the response locally to the proposals for the Beeston Active Travel Neighbourhood? The table at 3.5.14. I've had an email this morning about a proposed active travel scheme in the Horsworth ward, but it isn't listed in this table. And is there a reason for that? And finally, 3.7.3, I feel referring applications to panel has been inconsistent, and in some cases I think has been rushed. There's an application to develop 153 units on the old college site in my ward that has been referred with only 2.5 weeks notice, with no updated biodiversity report, nothing on 106, highways and school places concerns remain unaddressed. Martin, I'm asking you if you will delay this until we can have a proper discussion between yourself and ward members, and also why such a short period of time has been allocated to this application, going from an officer recommendation to City Plans panel. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Martin, before you come back, I just wanted to add a further question to the first one that Jonathan asked about the business support grants. Have we picked up any instances of inappropriate applications or even fraudulent ones during the process?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, there was a range of questions there that I took down. Perhaps in terms of responding and providing Councillor Taylor with the best response, if I ask Eve to respond to Councillor Taylor on the discretionary grants, and particularly picking up on the point on representations that we've made, I think drawing out the process that we have to go through in terms of checking and appraising applications, and that in turn will allow Eve to outline the extent of any applications that could potentially have been fraudulent or wrongly presented. And then if I ask Gary to look at the school streets issues, the Beeston Neighbourhood Active Travel and the Horsforth Active Travel, and then I'll come back to Councillor Taylor on the specific planning comment he made in relation to Horsforth. If I structure it that way, Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Yeah, Eve.
I'll ask Eve to come in.
Eve.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Thank you, Chair. So on the discretionary grant fund, just briefly to explain, the discretionary grant fund takes significant officer time compared to the initial grant funds because the business may not be known to us through the rates database. We are obliged naturally to make checks around that business to ensure, exactly as the Chair was implying, that as a legitimate business, but also to check their application against the criteria that were set. So from a standing start, we were able to design that scheme, put in place the applications, and open from June for the first 4 weeks of applications, during which time we received 962 applications for that first phase. It then obviously takes time to look at each one of those. So we used the whole of June and July to go through those, and we were enabled initially to approve 447 of those applications. The main reasons for those applications not being approved in that first phase was because they'd either already received a grant through the first set of schemes, or over around 137 businesses, or they were trading from a domestic property. Those were the main reasons. We made some, so during July, we began the discussions about adjustments to the scheme for a phase 2. And at the point where we were about to launch that, we were informed by central government that the scheme was going to be closed at the end of August. At that point, we made representation within days, collectively with the other West Yorkshire authorities, to the senior civil servant responsible for the discretionary grant fund, because not just ourselves but other local authorities were in a very similar position in terms of the number of grants they'd been able to process at that stage. And we collectively requested that we could have at least 8 weeks to process grants after that date. We were later informed that we would get 4 weeks to the end of September. And in parallel to having those negotiations with government, we are reopened to applications at the beginning of August for a further 4 weeks until the deadline of the 28th of August, which was set by central government. So in that second phase, we received another 312 applications, and we have been processing those, but also going back over applications that we had to turn down in the first phase to see if we could now support them. I'm pleased to say that since the beginning of September, we've been able to process £2.8 million worth of grants through the team, which is kind of a kind of incredible effort, really. We did make a second representation, Councillor Taylor, at the end of when the scheme closed at the end of August, because we have been in correspondence with a number of home-based businesses who are in desperate circumstances, who are naturally turning to the council for support. And we have made representation again into bays to those senior civil servants around highlighting these issues, and we'll continue to do so through the channels that both Tom, as our Chief Executive, has through the Core City groups and channels, and through our Finance Director as officers through the officer route, as opposed to any political lobbying. So I hope that kind of addresses the point. If there's any, sorry, Chair, you asked about any fraudulent, so I couldn't give you a specific number, but yes, we have had some applications which usually we hope we've filtered out at the beginning in terms of the checks that we make on an application at the start before they go into appraisal, in terms of checking at Companies House that they're registered if they are registered, and various other ways to check that they're a legitimate business.
Okay, thank you, Eve. Jonathan, I'll let you come back at the end once we've gone through the first tranche of questions.
Chair, if I come back in now and try and deal with some of the traffic
Yes.
ones, I will rely
please,
on
Gary.
my colleague Andrew to help with some of the detail behind some of the questions, because I won't have that, and Andrew will be a bit closer. But so if I make a couple of general comments first. Obviously, we've worked with schools for many a year to encourage safe walking to school, and that's a process that continues. And we have regular contact with schools to encourage that. As has been said, School Streets initiative has been very popular, and we are receiving lots of requests to repeat this across the city. But given the level of detail that's required for those schemes and our resources, we will have to be careful how we pick those going forward. So it's a very positive story in that they're going down very well on site, and we are receiving more requests. But in those circumstances, it's difficult to then meet demand. But well, clearly, we do want to expand that initiative as much as we can. I think there was a comment made about a recent contact, I think in the last 24 hours, regarding cycling schemes. That's not part of what we're talking about here. That's slightly different in terms of it's related to a City Connect type scheme, a scheme between Horsforth and Rodley Roundabout. And colleagues will be in touch with ward members again soon to set up a meeting to go through the detail of that. So if Councillor Taylor can just bear that in mind, that we'll be making contact in the near future. And I think probably the final comment from me at this stage, Martin referenced phase 1 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund. We've got that. We did put a bid in for the second round of that. Unfortunately, the government decision around that is delayed. It's got a very tight timescale in terms of implementation on the ground. So we are desperate to hear from government about the allocation of that second bid as soon as possible. It's a few weeks behind now, so we are in touch with the combined authority to understand where that announcement is. But we understand it's with ministers, and we'll hear soon. So at that point, if I could ask my colleague Andrew to introduce himself and just answer some of the detailed points that Councillor Taylor made, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Gary. Andy.
Hello, Chair. Sorry, I've got a bit of a problem with the video, so hopefully you can hear me audio-wise. So just on
if you could just introduce yourself, Andy, please.
Sorry, Andrew Hall, Head of Transport Planning.
Thank you.
So just on the school streets, just to top and tail what Gary has just said. When we launched the initiative, we wrote to all schools to invite them to express interest. So we pretty much the 14 schools that are now in the trial, and it is a trial, are the ones that we judge to have the best benefit of opportunity for success with the funding that we've got available. The trials will be evaluated, and the question then beyond that would be how we roll out and how we resource it, as Gary's touched on. In terms of, there was a question about the Beeston Active Travel neighbourhood. We're still in the process of engaging with the community on that scheme, so no work has been done to implement a scheme in Beeston. That is still in the process of engagement, and there has been discussions with the local ward members on that scheme. So that's the position with Beeston. Some further engagement is due to take place in the next few days. And I think that probably does address Councillor Taylor's questions.
Okay, Andy, thank you. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, the final question related to a planning application in Councillor Taylor's ward. I think the best approach there, Councillor Taylor, is if I speak to the Chief Planning Officer. You asked if I would make a decision for it to not go to the panelists this time. I actually don't have delegations over planning applications, so it's not a decision that I could make if I was minded to do so. I think it's probably best if I speak to the Chief Planning Officer facilitate a direct discussion that you can have with the Chief Planning Officer, and then he can have those conversations with the chair of the relevant plans panel in terms of how they then choose to consider that point that you raise. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Jonathan, do you want to come back?
Yeah, and firstly, thank you to Eve, Gary, and Andrew for your answers, and Martin as well. Just 2 points. I'm satisfied with most of what I've heard. Just 2 points though on the if Andrew could expand on the Beast and Active Travel proposals. There must have been some response, considering that a Zoom meeting has been set up to try and explain this further. Is it that the local people aren't happy with the proposals, or has it not been explained thoroughly enough? What's the move behind that particular call? And just back to Martin, I mean, 2.5 weeks to send something to panel it's outrageous when the documents haven't been sent up to haven't been uploaded to the portal. I mean, I know you say that it's not within your remit, but this is the most significant development in my ward. 2.5 weeks surely can't be within the proper governance of this. And if there is a comment on that, I would appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Andy, do you want to pick up the further point on Beeston, and then I'll come to Martin?
Yes, Chair. So in answer to Councillor Taylor's question, the Beeston scheme is quite complicated in trying to what we achieve in Beeston. We had done quite a lot of pre-engagement before, as the bid was going through. But one of the issues we had is there's been an administrative mix-up in terms of some of the communication with the community. And that has been the cause of some of this delay. So that is the honest answer to that. And there is some work in hand as well to have an online question and answer on the scheme as part of the engagement process. I have to say that this is part of the learning of working in a sort of COVID environment where, yeah, we haven't got the team in the office. We were, as colleagues have said, in the process of moving to a position where we could have small teams working in the office. Now that remains to be seen given the change in the rules. But that administrative mix-up was largely due to multiple parties working on COVID.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Andrew. Martin?
I think Councillor Mulherron wanted to make a point on the planning issues raised by Councillor Taylor. Councillor Truss.
All right, she ought to know how to operate the hand signal, but go on, Lisa, please.
Yeah, sorry, I can't find I was waving my hand, but
it's under participants, and then yeah, but go on.
Thank you, that's helpful. It wasn't that issue. It was actually on the Beeston question that Councillor Taylor asked, just to say that the public engagement has been requested by local ward members so that their local residents can have an opportunity to raise their questions and have them answered by officers, so they can clear up any misconceptions about the proposals there.
Okay, thanks for that. And Martin?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of...
I suppose you can refer us back to your previous answer.
Well, I will raise the matters with the Chief Planning Officer, but I don't want to be seen to be, applying any influence that I shouldn't be on a live planning application. So, I mean, I think you've expressed your concerns very clearly, and I've noted them, Councillor Taylor, and I will be making sure that the Chief Planning Officer is aware of them and speaks to you directly on them.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Right, moving on to Neil Dawson, Councillor Neil Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. Two issues I'd like to speak on. The first one is, regarding economic activity. We've got information about the city centre, but do we gather any intelligence or information about the out-of-town centres? And I'm thinking particularly of my ward, Morley Town Centre, and the White Rose Centre, of economic footfall there and economic activity. And my second question is around the park and ride facility at Ellen Road, which I welcome the reopening, but in terms of being a COVID secure manner, my experience is not that when I've been on it, that there were passengers not wearing masks, and the driver didn't believe it was his responsibility to enforce that. I mean, he wouldn't say who it was, but, you know, it's just that I'm concerned that, you know, we're not operating in the COVID secure manner that we think we are. It's not my experience. So, and again, I appreciate there's no one on from the operators or from WICA, but if it can be relayed to them that, you know, it's not operating as we think it might be. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Maybe Eve and or Sue could respond to the first question and Gary to the second one, please.
Yes, in terms of the specific sort of questions around data about footfall, we don't have many footfall counters outside the city centre, but it is something that I'm working with Stephen Blackburn, who leads on smart cities, around trying to increase the number of footfall counters so we can collect more data. And just on a broader sort of long-term piece, as part of economic recovery, we have got work underway at looking at the data we have around districts and city centres and considering how we can bring that together with kind of discussion with colleagues across the city so that we can start to understand the impacts more deeply and determine our best policy interventions going forwards on that work.
Okay,
on the park and ride, that's the first time I've heard that it's an issue on our park and ride service. It is a problem on general bus services, and that's been reported not just in Leeds but across the piece, across the nation, as an issue. And a lot of effort is going into improve communications to make that compliance much better. Train operators are reporting, and at the train station, a good level of compliance because of if you like, it's operating as a closed system, and that people are able to be persuaded to put them on. But across the city, the size of Leeds, it is difficult on bus services. So we are raising that as an issue, not just locally but nationally as well. I will certainly speak to colleagues about Ellen Road then, and in particular, because that is more of a closed system, and I would have thought that we would be able to influence that a bit more. As I say, it's the first time I've heard of it in relation to our services. We're very pleased that Ellen Road is back and up and running, and numbers are increasing slightly, but we're obviously going to have to review it given recent announcements. But I will pick that up with colleagues and the combined authority and first after this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Neil, do you want to come back at all?
No, I thank Gary for his comment, and as I say, you know, it's just a concern, and it is, you know, and on terms of economic activity, I'm sure places like the White Rose Centre must be aware of their economic activity in football, so we should be able to get information. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I should have made it clear that the bus operators generally have taken a stance that it's not their the bus operators and their drivers, it's not their responsibility to do the enforcement, just because of the likely difficulty that they might encounter with certain members of the public. So it is different from train operating circumstances. So it is dependent on effective communications and individual responsibility to heed the warnings that are being clearly given, and for people to wear masks in public places as directed. And we're in that circumstance. In many respects, it's like drink driving and speeding. It's an individual responsibility, and we need that to happen here. But as I say, I will report it in and see if we can improve the situation by encouraging communicating more.
Martin, did you want to come back in?
Yes, Chair. It was just in relation to Councillor Dawson's query on White Rose. I mean, through our key account management, we do keep regular liaison with Land Securities, who own and operate both Trinity and White Rose. I know through speaking to them that the footfall at Trinity is about 70% of normal, so it's tracking broadly where I said the city centre was, and that they fed back that White Rose was higher and closer to more normal footfall traffic, but they will have that data and I'll be able to get it for you, Councillor Dawson.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair. Some of my questions have been addressed, so thank you to others who've asked them. I have a question about do we have much data on the impact on apprenticeship schemes and how they've been affected during the crisis, and obviously how that's affected our younger people in employment, and also any information on our people who've recently been made redundant being able to access skills and training. Thank you.
Sounds like one for Sue.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we know that in the first phase of lockdown, apprenticeship starts nationally and locally fell anywhere between 50% and 75%. And to a degree, this was understandable because not only might employers find that difficult to look at starting new entrants, colleges and universities were, and other training providers were also closed. The situation has recovered somewhat since then, and up to the end of Q3, in Leeds we had over 4,000 starts in the current academic year. The Q4 figures won't be available till October, November. So I can't tell you to the end of the academic year, which is the end of July, but to the end of the third quarter, it was over 4,000. And that's round about 37% less than normal. And if you compare that to the national figure, it's kind of tracking the national trend. So apprenticeship numbers are down, and I think of concern to certainly the two FE colleges in the city is whether or not all apprentices that were furloughed will return to work and whether or not they might be subject to redundancy, and that's something that we're all keeping a close eye on. Having said that, we still do have businesses coming forward wishing to start apprenticeships, and the government's Plan for Jobs 2020 made further subsidies available to employers who start an apprenticeship between now and January, and we are promoting that locally. And in fact, at the Leeds Digital Festival, we have a session targeted at digital companies in terms of how to employ an apprentice and the support that's available in the city to enable them to do that. And I think the second part of the question was about redundancy and support that people can access. Yes, we have a number of businesses coming to us with their plans about redundancy and seeking early engagement and support for staff that are at risk of redundancy. And we are engaging with those. We are also working with Job Centre Plus, so that who have a rapid response team that's specifically designed to work with employers that are looking to make staff redundant. So we are aligning our efforts so that we can play each to their area of expertise and strength. So there are resources and support available. And despite lockdown and despite the difficulties of providing that support largely online, we have supported over 1,548 people into work since April, which is not hugely down on our usual numbers. So people are accessing the support and it is proving successful for some.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Lou, do you want to come back?
No, thanks, Sue. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wadsworth.
Thank you, the problem coming at the rear end of all this is that both questions have sort of been touched upon. I initially wanted to follow on from Councillor Buckley's comments with regards to our staff and the wider staff working in offices in the city centre. It's quite all right to survey them and find out what they would like to do, but it sometimes needs to be done from the reverse, and we need to find out what is best for their well-being and their productivity, because at the end of the day we do need to be productive. But initially what worries me is that some staff may be wanting to work from home because there are hidden issues around their place of work, which has become their home. And I think it'd be useful for Angela just to say what we're doing about trying to assess and find out whether there are problems. I certainly know that some staff want to come back in for different reasons. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good. And I guess it's the reverse as well, that some want to stay at home for reasons that are not good for their health or others' health. Secondly, it's one to Martin around plans panels. I don't want to touch on any live planning applications, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of consistency amongst the three plans panels. I'm certainly having an issue with a planning application in my ward, getting it to panel. Councillor Taylor seems to have an issue with an application coming to panel too quickly. There is no consistency, and members of the public expect us to know exactly what is happening, whether it be the same as it was before or changed. And it does seem to be that plans panels can only deal with a very limited number of applications at each meeting, and then we have to have another meeting. I'm on city plans and we only appear to deal with one application per meeting, so these meetings are getting more and more regular, and so that is a concern to me. So it's a wider how plans panels are going to work for the foreseeable future, because I think I was hoping we were going to get to a hybrid plans panel, but I fear that with the new regulations that may not come as quickly as I would like it. And secondly, probably one to Gary with regards to Ellen Road Park and Ride. I've noticed that the numbers at Ellen Road Park and Ride are tiny compared with what we previously had. And so that does reflect on the fact that I think Councillor Dye had concerns about people not being able to get on buses on some corridors that are overfilled, and that really we should be relocating buses onto corridors that are busy corridors, particularly taking students in. My own buses are not particularly full at all, and certainly in the morning peak they're not full. They tend to get fuller as the 9:30 concessionary pass holders come out to use them. But it's an issue with getting those buses that we have, the limited number of buses we have, in the right place at the right time. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Angela, before I bring you in, could I just piggyback on the first question that Councillor Wadsworth asked about the responses to the working from home survey? And there's 12% of staff who were unhappy. Could you give us some feel for the reasons that were expressed in that regard? Could I also seek assurance that in terms of the overall working from home strategy, that trade unions have been very closely engaged in the broader issues around that? And finally, are there any implications for any of our frontline staff in terms of the provision of PPE? And if there are, have we got sufficient supply now and in the future? So I'll piggyback that one, and then I'll come on to the questions that were posed to Martin and to Gary. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and morning, Councillor Wadsworth. I'll take this question in a couple of parts, and firstly start with, obviously home working is not new to our organisation. It's something that we've been doing for a long time, and certainly the Changing the Workplace programme has been going on for a long time. So home working actually allowed us that resilience to, when we had to do it by necessity, to pivot very quickly to doing that for a lot of people, some 8,000. The survey, when it went out, was a bespoke working from home survey. In addition to that, we have a regular wellbeing pulse survey that's going out to our colleagues to see how they are and what they need from us as an organisation at regular intervals throughout the period of the pandemic, and that is run by my HR colleagues. In terms to the survey itself, what we were asking them is, should we, and when we get on a life of the other side of the pandemic, what do people want to see from their workplace, so that at the same time we can be twin tracking what our estate strategy needs to look like. So we were asking people about what works well at home, what doesn't work so well at home, and on a general rule of thumb, what percentage of your time do you think you could remain working at home and you would want to come into the office? So the reasons that people wanted to come into the office were for collaboration, were for training, were for face-to-face, was for that social interaction. But on the broad scale, they didn't want to do it as often as they had done previously. So it was more concentrated quantities. You asked about the about what does our organisation need from our staff, as well as what do they want, and that's where we are at the minute. We're working out actually what parts of our business can't be done very productively in the home, and when do we need to get those colleagues back in, or how do we change our systems that allow us to be more productive even remotely. So there's a couple of work streams that are ongoing at the minute, and prior to the guidance coming out yesterday, we were putting more group working spaces back into our office environment, of which obviously Andrew Hall referred to earlier, and collaboration spaces where people could come and work together more productively and collaboratively, and obviously that is under review at the minute. You talked also about the hidden issues about being at home. We do have a HR helpline that has been available throughout the pandemic for colleagues who needed some additional support. And I think up to the end of September, we've taken about 300 calls into that helpline, and they ranged from a variety of issues, from people who just didn't have enough space at home to people who were perhaps struggling with that lack of social well-being, and where we've been able to support colleagues we have, whether that's bringing them back into a COVID secure office environment, or it's by through extra contact within their working team. Obviously, our colleagues aren't working remotely without any contact from their line manager, and that's something through the manager comms that goes out weekly. We've been encouraging and making sure that line managers are in regular contact, if not in physical contact, but by phone, by email, by things like Microsoft Teams and Zoom, so that they are connected into the business. Does that answer your question, Councillor Wadsworth, before I move on to Councillor Trustwells?
I'm reassured in what you're doing. I just do feel that, you know, I guess you've not had to the helpline and a colleague who has come and said, you know, I'm having to work from home, but I'd really like to get away from a violent partner, because they're not going to say that sort of thing in any area where it could be checked upon or tracked upon. Whereas if they were face-to-face meeting a line manager, the line manager may well pick it up from other things and body language and that sort of thing. It's something that, you know, as an employer, you do pick up in the workplace that things are not quite right, and then you start to dig, and it's surprising when you start to dig what you find sometimes, you know, within that. And I feel that is what we could be missing, and that could develop, could be something small now, and because there's no interaction with the employer and the workplace absolutely face to face, and that's my concern around it all. And it's not just with the council, it's my concern across all employers in the city that there could be this behind the closed door, which we're not getting to as quickly as possible. You know, that's my real concern about asking the question, is that we need to get, you know, beyond what is sometimes put in a survey or sometimes said to people. You know, I just look at this screen now, and but there are a number of cameras that are off for various reasons, I guess. You know, and I'm one who turns my camera off to do various things. You know, but if you were in a meeting and that was constant by one person, would you pick that up, that a particular person never has their camera on? And is there a reason behind that? You know, that's the sort of thing that face to face couldn't be hidden if they walked into the workplace.
I think we've got the point.
Yep.
Angela.
I think they're really valid points, and something that we're really concerned with. And obviously we have a safeguarding responsibility as employers anyway. So I think I can do a couple of things. I'm just noting extra videos going on. First of all, I will take it back into our weekly meeting that we have with our HR colleagues. And secondly, we have had some instances where people have reached out because they wanted a safe space to work within. So those issues have come through and we have accommodated those people. already within our estate.
Yeah, I'm reassured. The chair wants to move on as well.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you've got 2 more responses to come yet, Paul.
I know.
So who's first? Gary, Martin?
Shall I do the Ellen Road one, Chair?
Yes, please.
So yeah, quite rightly, at the moment the numbers are some way down from where they were pre-COVID, and we expect that. I have to say they are slightly higher than I was anticipating. The last figures I saw were about 200 to 250 cars a day were using the site, and it was increasing. But obviously, the announcements in the last 24 hours, we'll have to see what impact that has. And obviously it is reliant on government funding and whether that continues. So we'll keep it completely under review on a regular basis. It's a very strange situation with the bus services and the traffic flows at the moment, where all day traffic flows, as Martin said, are quite close to normal levels, pre-COVID levels, probably within about 10 to 15%. And getting closer day by day, but the AM peak is still some distance off pre-COVID levels. It's about 26% off. And as I've said before at this meeting, if you remember, I think that school holidays in normal circumstances, when you see the dramatic drop off in congestion levels normally, that equates to about a 10% drop off in traffic flows, 10 to 15%. We're talking about a 26% drop off at the moment in the AM peak. And that is really significant. And that's why it's so very quiet early in the morning, but it is getting busier during the day. And so bus operators and ourselves are just getting used to this dynamic situation. And they are working to understand where the issues are and moving vehicles as and when they can. I suppose all I could really say is that if councillors have specific examples of where there are problems on particular bus services, please feel free, if you have contacts with the combined authority, because they are in daily contact with the bus operators, please feed that intelligence information through to them. Alternatively, we'd be happy to pass it on, and hopefully then we'd be able to address some of the issues, but maybe not all.
Okay, thank you. Martin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think you raised the question of PPE and PPE supplies. If perhaps I can offer some observations on that, because as a consequence of the pandemic, I chair a group across a range of, well, all of the West Yorkshire districts and a range of other public sector agencies about our resilience in terms of PPE supplies. Our objective has been to try and secure a 90-day supply for the agencies across West Yorkshire. And we've been working on that. That's been quite a rapidly changing position, where we were informed a couple of weeks ago by the Department of Health and Social Security that they will deliver to local authorities the PPE to meet their needs. So I'm currently liaising with Angela's colleagues in asset management about our storage capacity, so that in the next 2 weeks we can take an order of those PPE supplies that we've identified as what we need to meet our needs and resilience. So subject to that, we should have a good stock of PPE in place. Then Councillor Wadsworth raised the question of plans, panels and consistency. As he was speaking, he referred to the proposals for hybrid meetings, which was one of the points that I was going to raise in response that they were coming forward. I think Councillor Wadsworth is right that they would have to now be reviewed in the context of the recent guidance. I did actually participate in a hybrid meeting on another subject area within the Civic Hall last week, so I'm familiar of how they can work effectively. What I'll do is I'll raise Councillor Wadsworth's comments with David Feeney, the Chief Planning Officer, and those matters of consistency and what comes to panel and our capacity, and he can therefore then have those discussions with plans panel chairs and other members in terms of then how we can respond to that and the concerns that Councillor Wadsworth raises, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Paul, I say this with some trepidation. Do you want to come back?
No, I'm happy, Chair. I was muted anyway
Good,
by
good.
some.
Leave it there.
Maybe it was you.
Okay. Just a wider point I want to put to board members. I was conscious and reminded by paragraph 3.7.6 about the government's major and controversial proposed changes to the planning process. And I just wondered if you feel that it might be useful for us to have a briefing on this. It would probably have to be a separate briefing. We could add to that some of the points that have been made by members today. And let me be absolutely clear, I'm not suggesting something where we all come along and raise our own particular ward issues, unless, and I think this is important in the context of what being said, they throw up wider issues of principle and procedure. Because clearly any changes to the planning system impacts on us in terms of our wider terms of reference, but also issues like our sustainable development inquiry, housing mix, etc. So I just wonder if members would welcome that opportunity. I'm not kind of thrusting it on you, but it would seem to be an active issue which would be very useful to us, but I'm not sure there would be room to fit it on any of our planned board meetings, so it would have to be, as I say, a separate meeting. So would colleagues find that interesting or helpful? Don't all shout at once. Shall I take silence as acquiescence? Yeah, I've got enough thumbs up to right. Okay, I will liaise with Becky and obviously then with the officers with a view to setting that up. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Those officers who don't need to stay for any of the further items or the further substantive item, thank you for your attendance and feel free to leave us. That brings us on to agenda item 8, the Connecting Leeds Public Transport Investment Programme General Update. We have a number of officers who will be staying on, who've already introduced themselves, but there are one or two who I think are in attendance who I will perhaps ask to introduce themselves before, I think, giving the floor to Gary. So we've got Sabi Kira. Welcome, Sabi. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, it's Sabi Kira. I'm leading the LP TIP programs, Programme Executive Manager.
Okay, Dave O'Donoghue.
Hi Chair, I'm David O'Donoghue, Principal Transport Planner. I'm actually here for the bus lane trial, just listening in. I'm a bit early.
All right, okay. Well, it's all part of the same report. John White, do we have John with us?
No, John sends his apologies.
All right, I thought I couldn't see him on screen. I've got Paul Foster down, but I'm not sure that I see Paul.
Paul sends his apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And I've got Mark Philpott down as a possible attendee, but I don't see Mark either, unless he's here.
I think likewise, Chair.
Right, okay, it would have been useful to have been forewarned of those. Right, Gary, floor's yours.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you've requested, this is an update on where we are with the Leeds Public Transport Investment Programme, Connecting Leeds. As members know, a very wide programme of works being secured in a very tight time scale. Most of this, if you remember, DfT required us to spend the money by March 2021. And there was no flexibility on that at one stage, but now we have the flexibility where, provided schemes are in contract, we're able to carry over some of the funding into next financial year, which is helpful and something we thought was inevitable, just given the very short timescales that were involved. I think it's a very lengthy report. So I don't intend to go into the detail, but I think what I do need to pull out is that the financial aspect of this. There's considerable work ongoing, or almost on a daily basis, to review where we are with the finances. Because of the tight timescales that were involved, we developed a large number of schemes. knowing that not all of them would end up being implemented on the ground, but what would happen is that we would take them a long way in the process, so that should additional funding become available, we would seek to get them funded that way. And I'll just give you a quick example: the Temple Green Park and Ride extension. Notwithstanding the earlier comments about Park and Ride, it is a good one in terms of we developed the scheme, we took it through to planning, and now we have secure. We weren't able to secure funding through LIPTIP, but we have secured funding from another source because of the way it was developed and how far it was developed. And so that principle that we adopted very early on in this programme has served us very well. So there are a number of schemes that will fall below the line, but we are in active dialogue with the Department for Transport. We have very regular meetings with them. We inform them about what we call excuse me, the overhang, which is the money that will be spent next financial year now. But they've asked us, and we've provided it, about schemes that are well developed, to give them those schemes that we regard as shovel-ready, is a phrase that we often use, and they're finding that very useful for discussions that are going on in central government. Whether that will bring about further funding from that source in the near future, we shall wait and see, but we're in a very good position. Related to that is obviously that schemes are progressing well on site. Given the circumstances, the contractors have made good progress. Sort of the wet weather we had about a month ago did impact a few schemes, but not too much. But we will work through those issues. So I think it's a positive story, but we continue to review the situation. I don't know if Andrew or Sabi, you wanted to add anything to that general introduction at this stage?
I think other than the COVID impact, really, that there was a lot of nervousness early on, soon after March, about where these schemes are going to be going in terms of progress and cost. And I think the team have really pulled together to continue that work as sort of key work activity. Early doors, there's been quite a bit of pressure with suppliers and supply chain that did have some impact, but we also had some lots of advantages that we did take advantage of, which things like working in the city centre while a lot of the premises were closed, which means we could make good progress, and we did. And I think the team have really pulled together to move the programme forward and try and minimise the impact of the COVID pandemic impact, but that still results in a financial impact, albeit less of an impact than if we did work smart as we did earlier in the year. And that's also contributing to some of the overhang, as Gary mentioned earlier, which the DFT fully recognise, and I've actually been quite impressed that we've kept it to a minimum compared to what it could have been.
Okay, thank you. Any other officers?
Chair, it's Andrew Hall again. Just to say, I'm conscious that this report covers 3 items, and that there was a specific request for us to cover progress on Lawnswood from last year's scrutiny, and also from last year's scrutiny, the update on motorcycling and bus lanes. So they're contained in the report. Effectively, the Lawnswood section sets out really where we've got to with that scheme since last September. It's no longer in the LPTIP programme, but there has been some development work undertaken to look at options. That's still going on, and it's unfunded in terms of being able to bring a scheme immediately forward to delivery, but we are working towards getting to a position where we can do some public engagement. Again, we thought we might be getting into a position where we might be able to have a blended approach to that, both online and some limited public-facing work. I think that the second element has certainly disappeared back into the background in the last couple of days. So that it is where we're at the moment on that. And I think when we come to members' questions. When in terms of the motorcycle trial, we've got to a position where we've agreed in principle that that should be on the A65 corridor, being the most continuous corridor and best suited to demonstrating around that issue. And we're working to prepare the way to stage that trial within this financial year. We haven't programmed that in at the moment, but that's essentially where we're at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew, for the two last points, because they were my first two questions. I will ask you to expand on what you've said on both. The Lawnswood roundabout, how long do you think before new bids are going to be put into Wyker? And since the scheme is now not part of LPTIP, do you think a focus is going to be on cycling and active travel as opposed to buses and public transport? My second question on the motorcycle trial, I take it Scrutiny will be updated as soon as possible or as early as possible before implementation, as well as ward colleagues and neighbouring ward colleagues. And can I also ask about what additional signage or notices or press or anything are planned there, and will they be erected in good time and implemented in good time as well? Making sure drivers are aware that motorcycles will be able to get into the bus lanes will be a big part of this, I think, and making sure that message is spread as soon as possible or as early as possible before it starts is important. And finally, at 3.4, the Parkway at LBA Station, can I clarify that this is not dependent on the airport application? And one for Councillor Mulheron, Bradford Council have said LBA, the application at LBA is part of their plan for growth. Is that the opinion of this council? And what decision does this administration hope that the council takes on this application? Thank you.
That sounds as though you're inviting Councillor Mulheron to predetermine a planning application,
Exactly,
Jonathan.
yes,
But
yes, yes.
if officers, if officers could respond in turn, and then I will bring Lisa back to say what she feels she can say in response to the final point. So, who's going to start? Gary?
Well, I think it's probably Andrew, I think, really. There's a few detailed questions around Lawnswood.
Okay, and
Yes.
then Dave can come in about the points regarding the cycleway.
Yeah.
Okay, fire away, Andy.
Okay, so in terms of Lawnswood, that scheme remains one of a number of priorities that we've got that are unfunded. It remains a priority to have a scheme there for an improvement, as we presented to the board last year. There are some compelling reasons to have a scheme like Lawnswood, not least for road safety, but also to enable the smoother flow of traffic, but principally road safety. So we're developing the proposals. We are at the moment contributing to a review of the West Yorkshire Transport Fund that the Combined Authority are running as their annual review. So although we haven't got it in their corridor improvement programme at the moment, and some of the reasons are detailed in the main body of the report on LPTIP, we still intend to pursue the funding needed for the scheme. It's fair to say at this point in time, part of the work that is ongoing and we're looking to continue working on is firming up what the cost of the revised scheme would look like, all the background information that we would need to use for engagement. We would also be anticipating that during next year, potentially as the Combined Authority changes shape, but also in terms of the government spending review, we'll potentially anticipate that there may be announcements in there in terms of the funding, various funding streams that were in the government's programme before March. So we will be interested to see what the outcomes of those are. But the real message is that we're continuing to prepare for a scheme at Lawnswood. I hope that answers that question. I think David can probably answer on some of the detail. All I would say is that the points that Councillor Taylor has raised are part of the development process for bringing forward the scheme. So we will be engaging and giving members updates on the proposal as it comes forward and on the timelines and what it entails. And our comms team will be fully involved in ensuring that it's properly presented to the public and they're aware. The signing on the route will need to be changed to accommodate motorcycles on the signs that currently depict a bus lane, so that everybody's aware that motorcyclists will be legally able to use that. But if you don't mind, Chair, I'll just ask if David's got anything he just wants to add in there.
Sure.
I think Andrew's covered most of the points, but it's worth saying that I think there is a key need for promotion of the bus lane prior to the changes and to the trial, because I think evidence has shown in one of the earlier changes in London that a package of influencing travel behaviour measures did have a significant impact on reducing motorcycle speeds and improving road safety on when they were introduced. So yeah, I think that's certainly going to go hand in hand with the trial and the proposal.
Okay, thank you. Piece of information for board members, you'll see reference to wands and orcas, and I wondered what they were, and apparently the wand is a flexible plastic post that falls over if it's hit, and the orca, and this is very inventive, is a little lump that's painted black and white, presumably looks like a whale. Lisa, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I think that the aim of the wands is not that they fall over if they're hit, but that they provide protection to the people cycling on the other side of it from vehicles on the road.
Indeed, I think we could take that as read, but yeah, it was just to reassure people that we're not going to have lots of dented cars as well as safe for cyclists.
Yeah, just to give that a little bit more protection than a line painted on a road.
Absolutely.
Which is invaluable for cyclists. So I was invited to comment in terms of the application for an expansion to flights at Leeds Bradford Airport and a new terminal building, which will enable the expansion of flights. As you know, the airport already has a planning permission for an increased footprint and an increase in flights at that location. What Plans Panel are looking at, and clearly I'm not going to predetermine the planning panel decision, but what they're looking at are proposals to make the building itself more environmentally friendly, which I think we could all support. Then the issues around that are more complicated by the expansion in the hours of flying times, so earlier in the morning, later at night. The impact of that on local communities in terms of noise, pollution in particular. And then obviously, because of the expansion in flights that the application would enable, the likelihood of that having an adverse impact on our climate emergency ambitions as a council and our carbon reduction targets. Now, we've been very clear in public documents as a council what the impact of that would be on our climate emergency ambitions as a city, and that's a matter of public record. What we've also been very clear about is that we have asked national governments to look at the National Aviation Strategy, and that's where all of the legal advice is, where the responsibility sits. The aviation industry is obviously in a significant state of flux at the moment anyway as a result of COVID, but throughout the last, what we're now 6 months of the COVID impact in this country, we've seen other airports expanding. There was, before we went into lockdown in March, applications for airports to expand in Stansted and at Bristol that were considered in light of the new climate emergency declarations up and down the country, and of course the national government's own climate emergency declaration. They have a different target to the one that we've set. Ours is more in line with the international obligations set out by the IPCC in their report of November 2018. But the governments are 20 years further ahead of ours. The government seems to be slow to respond to its own declaration and hasn't made any amendments in terms of their national aviation strategy at all. We've written to Grant Shapps, I think must be, I'm trying to remember where that was now, it must be nearly a year ago, I think about 10 months at least, and haven't had a response in terms of urging the government to take into account the impact of flights and the expansion of flights up and down the country, so that we would have a level playing field for all of the airports, and they weren't therefore competing against each other, and we had a nationally set target. That's what we need to have to be able to properly take into account both the flight growth within this country, but also the flights internationally. And rather than pitting one airport against another and one community, one city against another, we should have that national approach, and that's what's severely lacking.
Well done, Liz, well done.
Thank you, Lisa. Jonathan, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew and David, the responses on the first 2 points. And thank you, Councillor Mulheron. I appreciate it. It's difficult to tread the line when this is active between what you can, say and what you don't want to influence. But the council must have a view as to whether the development at the airport is part of a strategy on growth, and Bradford Metropolitan Council has said that it is, and that it should go ahead. I find it a bit difficult to believe that this council and this administration doesn't have a view, whichever way it is. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Could I just ask, Councillor Graham, did I see you trying to attract my attention with a wave of the hand earlier, or not? You need to unmute, Ron, if you're responding.
Yeah, I've gone past it, Chair. It's just we're on the transport. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We're on the transport, the A64, Andy, where we've put forward for closure of the subways to save money for the council in the present crisis we're going through, and get some zebra crossings in there. Is there any movement on that particular issue? Because I did write to Liz. Liz is aware of it, my chairman. You know what I mean, Paul? The two subways asking for closure and putting zebra crossings in instead. The safeguarding the public that are playing hell about using them subways. We're aware of it, Chair, but I just want to get some on the meeting that we can follow up on.
Okay, thank you. Andy, can you respond to
that? Yes, Chair. Yes, Councillor Graham. So, Councillor Graham, I think one subway was replaced by the existing crossing that we now have on York Road near the Hope Inn, which is the one where the roadworks start. I think the site you're talking about is the one that's further up the hill towards the top, towards Torry Road. So I have asked my colleagues to look at that further, and we're looking at whether we can include it in a future pedestrian crossing review for a fully controlled crossing, so that we can provide an alternative to the subway. Colleagues did do some work on a bridge. That is a very significant undertaking, and also we generally find that bridges don't really fit the piece for most people, because they would prefer to cross the road at grade. So we haven't got any funding for a crossing at the moment, and we do need to establish more clearly what the demand and use is being. So that remains a piece of work, Councillor Graham, in progress. And we would have to bring that forward as part of our future proposals for next year or the year after's expenditure from the local transport plan monies that we get from the combined authority.
Okay, Andy, many thanks for that. I'm sure the chairman will correspond with us. Chairperson.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Ron. So I've got Neil Buckley, Neil Dawson, and then Lou Cunningham. Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was a couple of questions which, as it happens, both of these projects are in Moortown Ward. And the only reason I bring them up, with apologies to Councillor Shazad, is that one concerns the main shopping parade in Moortown, which is used by thousands of Old Woodley residents. And the other is King Lane, which of course is the second busiest route from Old Woodley through Moortown into Leeds. And I know Gary and Andrew will both be aware that the bit of King Lane I'm talking about, which runs up the hill towards Stonegate Road, was going to have the bus lane in it, and it's now been delayed. And they'll both be aware that Leeds Jewish Housing Association have gone ahead quite properly with a big project there, which is a complete expansion of their estate and a modernisation and so on. And I imagine that what's happened is that had the scheme gone ahead, it would now be complete, and then the housing project would have followed on behind. So residents coming along in due course to live in the houses would then have had a perfectly normal environment in which to live. So perhaps somebody could explain to me that, am I right in thinking that if and when the scheme goes ahead, the residents will have to put up with all the noise and disturbance because of it? That's the first question. And then secondly, could somebody just address themselves to the shopping parade in Moortown? Because it isn't safe. The parking on the parade, which was altered because of all the new arrangements, has made it so that anything longer than a small car parked in the bays there forces traffic going up the access lane onto the pavement. The only way to get round the parked cars is on the pavement. And I'd just like somebody to address that, please, Chair.
Okay, who's going to kick off with that? I'm not quite sure how the second question, Neil, relates to the report before us, but you know, I always exercise a huge amount of latitude in these circumstances.
Well, it's all part of the project, Chair.
Okay, fine, you've sold me on it.
Okay.
Okay, who's going to respond?
I can respond, I suppose, in reverse, Moortown first, I suppose. With the Moortown Corner scheme, clearly that's now been completed, and the part of that process is to carry out a road safety audit of all the movements in and around the junction. That's all pedestrian traffic and cyclists and movement, etc. I think what I need to do as a bit of an action is take stock of exactly where we are with that result and the output, and feed that back to yourself, Councillor Buckley. That's okay.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, are you okay with that, Neil?
Yeah, if I get some kind of response on that, which makes sense, it's just a safety matter,
I'll
be happy.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah,
okay,
I don't know, Sabby, if there's been a post-construction safety audit.
That's what I'm going to check on, Gary, see where we are with that.
Okay, but like with all our schemes, we monitor, and if we've got comments such as that, we're more than happy to have a look at it and review to see what the issues are. So that's okay. In terms of the King Lane issue, and I think the general comment I'd make there, it's as I said earlier, we've prepared a lot of schemes to get to a certain stage. They're not going to move to implementation until funding becomes available. But if and when that funding does become available, unfortunately with these schemes, there will be a level of noise, disruption, inconvenience. But we will do our utmost, as we always do, to try and minimise inconvenience to all users of the highway. So unfortunately, that's just a consequence of funding, timing, and development taking place in the area. So I'm not sure we can avoid such things.
Okay, thank you. Neil, you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, thank you. Right, I've got councillors Neil Dawson, Lou Cunningham and Mo Shazad. So Neil.
Right, thank you, Chair. My question is about on table 4, under the rail packages, there's mention of improvements at Morley Station. And I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is that the comment that's there could have been written 8 years ago when George Osborne was Chancellor. You know, we expect it to be done by Network Rail, but, you know, nothing has happened in the intervening 8 years. Is it, I mean, as far as I'm aware, there is a scheme ready or shovel ready scheme with WICA to do the improvements needed at Morley Station on disabled access, on new car parking. And it seems to be one of funding and whether, I mean, I need clarification of whether Network Rail are actually going to do this work, or is it just going to fall between several stools? You know, I think it would be possible to get some update from either WICA or Network Rail or our own officers as to when this is even planned, because as far as I'm aware, there's been no public engagement, no planning issues have been raised yet. So, you know, there's a lot of work still to do. So, I mean, I just like to get on the on sort of our horizon when this may actually happen.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Who's
you.
going to respond to that?
Andrew, are you able to respond? I know this has been a long running one.
Yep, I can respond to that question, Chair. So yes, Councillor Dawson, it has been on the list for a long time. It was in the scope of the LPTIP programme as one of the package of access measures for local stations. Well, you know the site better than I do. It isn't the easiest site, but proposals were developed and we worked with Network Rail to develop them. However, Molly's on the Transpennine route upgrade route, and Morley Station is part of the scope of the Transpennine route upgrade. We're still waiting for full clarity on the TRU programme, and WICA are still waiting on that. But we would expect actually that now it would be taken forward in the scope of the TRU project by Network Rail rather than with WICA funding by Network Rail. But I will ask for another update from my colleagues at the Combined Authority and let you know what the latest position is. But I appreciate your frustration that this project hasn't proceeded. The only thing I would say is potentially through the TRU, we might get a better solution for Morley Station, but that is still in the process of being made. I hope that helps.
Okay, are you okay with that, Neil? You're still on mute, Neil. There, you're back with us.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's useful, Andrew. Thank you for that. As I say, it's very frustrating that everybody agrees this should go ahead. And you know, it's been on the cards now for 8 years, at least. But we don't seem to get any further forward ever, you know. It really is frustrating. And I keep hearing how much money is going to be spent on infrastructure, and it's a thing, something that everybody agrees needs to be done, but nothing happens. So any information gratefully received.
Okay, thanks very much.
Will do. Yeah.
Lou.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. One, just to put on record that last year when the A65 motorcycle scheme was mooted in the press, the Army councillors had a fair few emails requesting that we object to that. So that's just to put that point on record. And also regarding some of the ongoing schemes, some of it I'll deal with outside of the meeting, but just to bring in some community aspects on the A647 scheme, that a lot of residents, I mean, I appreciate in the current climate that the notices have gone on to lampposts, but a few residents have just made comments that they're not finding that the notices are that accessible, either because they've had to be shielding, so they've missed the notices, and just really, I guess, that community voice of kind of recognising that a lot of the movements and changes are on the arterial routes, but to kind of spare a thought for some of the local estates that are going to have impacts and effects, and that they don't necessarily feel that they've been able to voice their opinions on it. But as I say, I'll take up most of it outside of the meeting, but just wanted to put that on note as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Lou. Who's going to respond?
Can I respond there, Councillor Trussell?
Of course.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. I've been made aware of some of the concerns that have come from the local residents and businesses along the route, as you've articulated. And what the team have been doing, certainly I'm aware over the recent weeks, where additional information, letters and plans have been delivered to the properties. So there's been that being cascaded out as well. I can check if there's any particular concerns or areas that you're referring to who haven't had sight of that. I'm quite happy to help out, but I'm aware that we have taken those steps to actually do hand-delivered notices to the areas that have raised that concern.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come back, Lou?
No, thanks very much, and that's appreciated. I think that I'm part of one of the estates that have received the hand-delivered letters, but so I will take it with you outside of the meeting, and thanks for that. I think the residents just still felt that there was a very short time scale because the comments have to be in by this Friday. So thank you.
Okay, no problems.
Okay, thank you. Mo.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your query that you raised, Councillor Buckley. Appreciate that, but we've had not such any queries come to us from our local residents. They're all quite happy with the scheme that's taken place at the Moortown Corner. But if you do have any pictures or any information regarding the health and safety issues, please feel free to forward the emails or the pictures onto us. And as the Moortown Ward Council, we will definitely look into that. As the local ward councillors, we were willing to work with the shopkeepers who mainly, may I suggest, are living abroad and probably taking benefit from from not paying tax in the UK and so on and so forth. We're willing to work with them to actually improve the parking further and invest some of our ward pot money into a scheme to make that a lot better. But we contacted all of them, and this was before my time as well, and we tried afterwards as well. But unfortunately, none of these shopkeepers came forward and they were not willing to work with us. So we have tried to make the scheme as best possible for the bus users as well as the pedestrians. And I think the scheme looks really good now. And we have had no complaints from any of our Moortown residents. And like I said, if you do have any issues, please forward them on to us and we will take a look at that. And we're more than happy to work with yourselves, since we do get a lot of footfall from the Al Woodley ward, which we appreciate. It's good to shop locally and we appreciate your support for our businesses, and long may it continue. Thank you, Councillor Buckley.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shazad, for that insight. I've not got anyone else indicating that they wish to speak, so I have two very quick questions at the end. The first relates to paragraph 3.5 on page 38, bus delivery. Makes reference to further investment in real-time bus information. This is an issue that we've recursed time and time again on behalf of constituents at this board, and it's the issue of whether the bus companies have finally addressed the issue of the phantom bus, i.e. the bus that on the real-time information makes its progress and then just disappears because it's never been there in the first place. And we've had numerous discussions over, I think, a couple of years on this notion of the phantom bus. I just wonder whether the bus companies and others finally got to grips with that particular problem. And my second question also relates to buses. On page 48, there's reference to the provision of new buses, and it says that First have delivered 189 of the 284 new buses, which is a figure slightly lower than the first figure, slightly lower than one that I've previously seen. It does indicate that there is an issue in the light of COVID and investment in the bus companies, but is that an up-to-date figure? And have we got any further idea of when First or whoever is going to be running local services is actually going to meet this commitment to the 184 buses? Is that one for you, Andy? Or two for you?
I'm happy to answer that, Chair. So,
okay,
in
fire away.
terms of the real-time bus information, so the report refers principally to the physical infrastructure providing new display screens. I think there's 500 provision in that programme for, I think it was 500 new screens and totems. The phantom bus issue, I think, remains an issue with the background software and the system that underpins it, which is a joint system between WICA and the bus operators. So that is the collaboration. The kit's on the buses, the system runs via WICA. My understanding, and I haven't had an update recently, is that that software is up for a renewal to help to resolve those problems, but it really needs the system to be updated to provide that certainty, remove that 5% of buses that never appear or they're a blank on the screen. So I will get an update on that, Chair, where they're currently at with that piece of renewal.
Okay, and on the bus numbers?
So on the bus numbers, again, I will need to get an update from First, but also Arriva in terms of their renewals. Well, I do know that First have been there. They have ordered a small fleet of electric single deck buses, as well as the buses that they've got on order for the new park and ride at potentially at Sturton, and that those new single deck buses, I think it's 7 new buses. Are in the country and they have them, so their renewals are proceeding, but I need to get an update on the current balance of buses to make the 284.
Okay, well, it's 2 issues I flagged up at our next meeting in October. We do have the advancing bus service provision update coming back to us, so hopefully it can be contained in there. Okay, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Mulheron, you've got your virtual hand and your real hand up.
Sorry, I'll work out to switch my virtual hand off in a second. Just wanted to say I visited the Hunslet Depot first bus a couple of days ago and saw the new electric buses there. They've got 9 currently, which are going to be operating on the number 5 service going through Halton Moor. They have 5 that are coming for Sturton Park and Ride. They were very clear that further orders were not in place pending the state of the finances. So we've got the 9 already, 5 on the way for Sturton, and then we'll have to wait and see what happens after that in terms of electric bus provision. But they had a ride around in the electric bus, and it was really a very good experience. It's very quiet. They've got all of the new facilities, USB, Wi-Fi on their charging facilities, really good air conditioning, and it's also kind of less bumpy. You don't get that juddering that you get with a diesel bus. Yeah, something clearly that I think we'd all like to see moving forward. They've got 10 charging points currently at Hunslet Moor coming in to charge those buses overnight so that they can operate up to 200 miles apparently, having been charged up overnight, which means they can operate that routes that they've already allocated successfully.
Okay, thanks very much for that update. And in the absence of any other indications, I'll draw the discussion to this particular agenda item to a close and thank everyone for their attendance. Lisa as Executive Board Member and the officers, thank you. Okay, moving very swiftly on to agenda item 9. It's just the usual work schedule. I don't think there's anything I need to draw to the board's attention other than to note it and obviously to take on board the discussion we had earlier, or rather my monologue earlier, about having an update on the new planning proposals and any other issues that throw wider concerns about the planning process. So unless there are any questions on that, I will draw the meeting to a close. Becky. Becky's waving her real hand. You ought to know how to do the virtual hand. This is really disappointing.
I can't do it.
But go on.
It's because I'm the co-host. I don't have the hand to be able to raise it. It was just
We forgive you anyway.
It was just to remind members about the extra working group that's penciled in for the 1st of October, just to note that I know it's a funny time in terms of your normal cycle, so it was just to make sure it's on radars.
Okay. Right. Can I now close the meeting?
Can I just check the time of that? Is that 1 o'clock? Sorry.
You're on mute, Becky.
Yes,
sorry, go on. Say that again.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So 1 o'clock, 1st of October.
Yes.
Super. Thank you.
Right. Any more for any more? Going, gone. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance and participation. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Well done, Paul.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.